Well, Mark, first of all, tell us about the schools aspect of the literary festival.
Well, it's an opportunity for authors to come into our school, Ryde School, but also other schools around the island now as well. And not just that, but actually other schools come together for these author talks, and not just authors, poets and playwrights and so on as well.
You've had a long involvement.
Yeah, I mean, we were involved from the start of the school's programme, actually. I think back in 2013 or 14, when I just arrived on the island myself, and it was something we were very keen to get involved in from the start.
I know it's an obvious question, but how do you get children to read books nowadays?
You know, it's J.K. Rowling and co have made it a lot easier than it was. I think that for all the online stuff that goes on there's nothing like the imagination that is let rip by reading a book. So actually, love of books is always there. People like something physical to get their hands on, and having authors coming in here and talking and being real makes a difference as well.
And you as a headmaster, what have you learnt from the interaction with the literary festival? What's helped you?
What's helped me? I mean, I've had a marvellous benefit myself, because it's given me an excuse to get out of the school and come to the various talks over here at Northwood. But what's been really good is to see what you just said, really, to see that the children can really be brought alive when they actually meet the people behind these stories. You can also see the authors and what they're getting from their experience as well, because clearly for them, you're sitting there writing your book, you don't see necessarily your audience initially, and to suddenly get those people and to see their eyes light up and to see them engaging with and asking some interesting questions that perhaps they might not have thought about until suddenly they've got an audience speaking to them.
And the beauty of children's books is that they've got a lot of illustration as well.
Beautiful often, and quite distinct, but also the illustrations will reflect a genre themselves often, and it doesn't seem to hold the children back from creating their own imagination beyond that. So although there is, yes, this is how this character looks in this book, it doesn't stop them drawing a completely different character when they make their own drawings that come out of it as well.
So you don't have any trouble getting them to volunteer to come?
None at all. That's really not the problem at all. Actually, the challenge in recent years has been just making sure we've got enough space for all the people that want to come. I mean, in the early days, you know, when we first started, it was just us at Ryde, and since then we've gradually had more schools come, local primary schools from Ryde and Bembridge area, and now there are groups all over the island now in the festival with schools going into different areas. Yeah.
So you see it as a growing aspect?
Definitely. I mean, it's definitely grown. When I think back to that first year, and I think we were the only school. And then the following year, a number of schools came to us, and then we said, let's have some satellites. And then it wasn't even satellites, it was whole areas of other parts of the island in the west and the centre as well. Yeah.
Have you got any particular favourite moments that you could think of?
I remember when we were talking to the teenagers, because we initially, it tended to be the younger children, a bit traditional to think about it, the 9, 10-year-olds and so on, or even younger. But then there was a talk a few years ago about film writing and film scripting and so on, and it completely engaged 15 and 16-year-old boys and girls, but you know, I'm saying boys because often those are the ones that aren't necessarily engaged always by literature, and that was a really exciting moment for them, saying when are they coming back. You know, it was great.
So who would you like to see here then as an author or illustrator even?
You've got me there. You really have caught me there. I mean, it would be wonderful to. I would really like to see someone like J.K. Rowling actually come over, because although we've got lots of amazing writers and illustrators going on as well, I do think that what she did those many years ago now in rekindling an excitement in literature for young children would be great to see. And you know, the extraordinary thing is, those early readers of Harry Potter are now themselves parents, but it still remains a very, very alive story, a very live adventure for many young people today. So it'll be great to see her and just see how she reflects on where she's come from.
And what about your involvement with the future?
With the festival, well, I hope we'll carry on being as involved as we have been and more. Really, it was nice to be there at the beginning to get the whole thing started. But actually, what's really nice now is to see that it's growing and the schools programme has got its own under its own steam as well. So that it's not something which we feel we are necessary for it to work. It's got its own momentum, but obviously it's great to be a hub out in the east of the island for all these wonderful things that happen.
Well, the festival happens in October, which is fairly early on the new term for you. Do you make it work throughout the season, or is it just that like winter term?
It gives us a focus in October, and it's actually quite a good time. It's everyone's back at school. We've been back for a month or so, and it gets books on the agenda, as it were. It's always a high point of that particular week. It's normally just before half term. So what you hope's happened is that the children have been inspired to go away and pick up books and go off and read them over half term as well, which they do. And then that leads to various events throughout the school year that you can then come back to and reflect on. Or indeed that sometimes you'll find that children have discovered authors that they didn't previously know, and or the teachers as well, and so that you might return to those books as the year goes on.
Do you know if any of the children have gone on to grow up and be inspired and even write?
I mean, certainly write, and there's a very strong creative writing tradition at the school, and in fact there are various national competitions that they've got involved in creative writing and creativity. We've got a girl who's gone and read illustration at university recently. She will have been there at the first programme. Actually, she left last year, so she'll have been there right at the beginning, back in 2013. It's definitely, I think, on the island in particular, where it's difficult for our children to just easily go to London or even Southampton or wherever. It's helpful when people can come to us. It means that we can get to and experience authors that perhaps on the mainland it's easier for people to do. But then it also, when you meet people who are writing and have written and have got published books or illustrated books, it makes it possible for you. And I think that's the key thing, is when you sit down with the author, there are lots and lots of children who are budding writers. They write every day. But what they feel when they see this is that could be me as well. I can do this. So it's not just about engaging with the story. It's about engaging with the process and the idea of what might be possible.
Very good. And finally, how has the COVID whole pandemic, endemic, helped the children? Have you seen them writing or reading more during this lockdown?
So we've been doing obviously a lot more online, and we spend a lot of time teaching our children into screens. I spent most of my teaching career trying to get children off screen, and I spent the last 4 months putting them onto it. So what that's done is it's made it even more important for us when we're not actually in lessons to make sure that we can curl up in a corner with a good read. And I think that people have come to appreciate that more, not less, actually. Obviously, there are plenty of ways to reach literature, and there are you can listen to stories, you can have audiobooks and so on. But I think there's been actually an appreciation for the hardback book sitting in the corner, snuggled up with a cup of cocoa and a read.
So the library's still a popular place then?
Very much so, and it's ready for them when they come back as well, even if it's a little bit socially distanced. You can read a book at 2 metres.